authority then to proceed with the acquisition of property as discussed in closed session.
All right. Are we in concurrence on that, gentlemen? Mr. Gallant, second.
Second.
Motion second. Vote, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Krebs made the motion. Mr. Gallant seconded. Yes. Now, quite frankly, I'm unclear as to where we are with the agenda. I'm waiting for Jamie to come back in. It's been a little bit helter-skelter this morning. In Chicago, there's an interchange right downtown. They call it the Spaghetti Works, and I feel that's what we've got here this morning. We've got Spaghetti Works.
I believe you wanted to keep 275 to the end.
Yeah. Item 275, which is the shoreland, wetland, and plainland, that still goes to the end. But I'm not sure if we're going to the Hillside boat launch presentation or if we're going on to the action items yet. All right, yeah, let's take a 3-minute recess. Thank you, sir. Your presentation. I assume you're not going to read the whole thing. That's fine. Yeah. That's fine. So, okay. I'm clear. Again, we would change things around. Yeah. Where we're supposed to be. Thank you to our visitors this morning for being patient with us. We just had a lot of things on the program this morning.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. We're gonna go to boat launch.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And we just took a 3-minute break, of which we got a minute and a half left.
Okay, great.
And leading the discussion will be Ed. All right.
Yes.
That's fine. That's fine. And my comments are still apropos.
Your comments.
My comments
Yeah,
about
so
this
good to
is
go.
not a public hearing, so to
Did you
speak.
see Nick come back? The January guy?
You know, it amazes me. It's been how many months since this restroom has been out of order?
Exactly. Sorry for being a minute or two late.
No, that's fine. We weren't sure if we hadn't heard from you. Now, we didn't hear anything from Todd.
They had all the traffic cones coming up.
just, there's a memo, but to clarify on this, in the past, there was an uptick in commercial boat launch use due to, if you want renovations building on the lake homes. And it became an issue in the sense where the public boat dock was kind of being used as a construction staging area. So moving forward, just to clarify this, of course, the action that the county planning and parks department is going to take is basically any contractor will have to fill out a special permit use if they're going to be doing shoreline work on Silver Lake with that. And then in addition, before and after they have any staging at the boat launch, photos will need to be taken, and they have 20 minutes at the public boat launch. So let's say they're loading up supplies, moving back and forth. There's a time limit on that. And finally, they may only work between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. So again, that's for contractors trying to address moving forward to make sure that we know how many are interested, managing that activity out there. I think currently we have one, the activity has died down, but again, for landowners, lake owners, and the public who want to use that, we need to make sure, there's some control and oversight of that. In the past, I think there was some issues with noise created from the boat launch. The county before stated they don't have jurisdiction. However, that can and should be enforced by the town of West Bend if there are noise issues at the public boat launch. In addition, we tried to address, there was light pollution. We did build a 6-foot fence for the adjoining properties to try and block light shining into the neighbors. There are 3 lights out there, 1 at the dock, 2 in the parking lot. Those are needed for safety, but are trying to use, the lighting, minimize that as much as possible as far as brightness and where that shines into. And then finally, again, these are all just recommendations in the sense that this is how the department plans to move forward. And finally, I know it's been some discussion is regarding the launch hours at Henske Hillside as far as what they are, what they used to be. So in essence, the recommendation is moving forward that we continue to follow state law, which is NR 191, that says all public boat docks, the egress cannot be blocked. So those hours would be from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. moving forward. I think in the past, there was some agreement, we're not really sure where it came from, that it would be deemed as a park and used for park hours. So again, our understanding of Henske Hillside Boat Launch is the entire area, the dock, the parking lot, it's a special events park permit area, i.e. it is a public boat launch, and so don't want to impede access to that. And I can touch on some policy items we're recommending maybe to try and help with that. But again, the signage that was there now is being removed. This is a recommendation for all public boat launches throughout Washington County, is that we continue to adhere to state law. And so that would be from 6 to 11. And as we remove and rebuild the kiosks, and new signage would be put up indicating that. So let me just touch on a couple policy items as well before there's questions. So then moving forward, policy item where we have the authority and our present court moving forward is just for public boat launches throughout the county. We would prohibit swimming and fishing off of those for safety reasons. Perhaps that might help with noise as well. And then as far as permitting Silver Lake PRD, that they could use the public boat launch to dock the patrol boat since they've been having trouble securing one, and that would allow then the presence and enforcement on that lake if there's necessarily noise, if you have people violating the swimming, fishing, that type of stuff, to help keep the order a little bit and have a presence out there. So moving forward, again, the 2 items, the public boat launch hours, that would be countywide, 6 a.m. to 11, in keeping with current state law. And then specifically for the Silver Lake with the boat launch and then swimming off, and fishing off the public docks, again, that would be for public boat launches only, because there are some piers in areas that are designated for fishing, swimming throughout the county.
Thank you. No, thank you. I'm not a boater, but I understand then that you can launch a boat up until 11 PM,
Yes.
but at egress coming out of the lake is anytime, 24 hours. There are no restrictions on that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good.
And then one item, just to call a note, we are working with the county attorney's office on updating our ordinances, allowing park staff to issue or write parking citations. That would be throughout our county parks. Just a heads up for all of you, so you're not surprised. We'll be meeting with the PRD, Little Cedar, Big Cedar Lake, and others in early December to go through some issues. We'll fill this committee in as well after that in more detail, but wanted you to know that we're going to be having that discussion and then ultimately working towards those changes to bring to this committee either in December or January, as we figure that out, with the idea that when we kind of reopen for the season in early May, that would be instituted and ready to go. So trying to work backwards from that date.
Thank you. For our audience, this is not a public hearing today. This is a give and take with answers. But you are here today because Ms. Ludovic asked you be given a forum in front of the entire committee. So we will be taking no actions today, but we'll defer to legal counsel and staff. But if you have some comments you'd like to make, please use the microphone, identify yourself and speak into the microphone. Thank you, sir.
Okay, my name's Stu Hannum. I'm one of the, at the Henske Hillside. I live to the north, so I'm a resident who lives directly to that. So I have a vested interest, obviously, in this. Dan lives just to the south. And then Jim is with the PRD, which is a part of, has some control and has some stake in this whole interest here. So that's why we have an interest in being here. First of all, just so a little bit on my background, which I probably have as much knowledge as anyone that's going to run into this room. I don't know if any of you guys were here when the launch was actually built. Is there anyone that was on board at that time?
I was in the council's office.
Okay,
But I'd be interested here.
fantastic. So we've lived.
For clarification, for anybody watching, explain PRD.
Jim.
Silver Lake Protection and Rehabilitation District. We are a district, a taxi district on Silver Lake.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
And so I've lived there for 18 years. I was there before the launch was there. I lived the launch. I was at all the meetings. I was at the whole process. So I was there from the start. I'm here at this point. The reason I'm here is several fold. If you have this document in front of you, I'm assuming, and if you go back to where it says the commercial use of the launch facility, that's me. Okay. I'm the one who, believe me, a year ago put up a huge fuss about this because we had contractors that had huge trucks just sitting at the launch there, filling up with gravel and things like that right next door. I've got grandchildren that are trying to sleep right next to it. We're 15, 20 feet from there and we're listening to that noise all day long. I really applaud the Eric Hyde, who was the guy who was dealing with it at the time. I complained to him. He came in and he got something done. We then had another issue with the same contractor where he started chipping all the wood that he was taking off the lake right next to our windows right there. And Eric Hyde took care of it. So I applaud him. That's me. I mean, I was all over that because it just got to the point where it had become a staging zone. And that's the purpose of the launch. And that's what it was meant to be. I was here 18 years ago when this whole process started. I was here when the board clearly said to me, they said, we're going to be good neighbors. We want to be your neighbor. Okay. So we're going to be neighbors that are going to be responsive to problems and concerns and things that you have. And I will say this throughout the time, I've seen, we're on to our fourth person that's in control of the launch, and the three of them were just extremely responsive. They never would allow some of the things that are going on right now to go on. I mean, they were just good. Recently, maybe not so much, not quite as good. I will just touch on something, a couple of things here real quickly for your own purposes that you're aware of this. Noise created from the boat launch, realize that the noise issue, the thing that you dealt with when we were talking about 2004, well, Washington County now has a boat patrol that you can contact, and they can go on the lake and they can deal with noise on the lake. That's what their job is. That's what they do. We've always had our patrol that can handle that, but Washington County has enforcement on the lake. So you have that. So that's changed since 2004. You didn't have that available to you there. So that's something you guys might want to consider about that. And then also, if you go onto your policy items about swimming and fishing, nothing new here. I mean, there are signs right up on there that say you cannot swim off of a public launch. That is true across the state of Wisconsin. You never allow swimming off of public launches. It's a safety issue. You don't want people swimming in the same area where propellers are spinning. So that's not allowed. Fishing, there's a sign right up there that says no fishing. I live right next door to it. Whenever I see somebody that's out there, I always walk up and say, are you aware there's no swimming here? Or are you aware there's no fishing off here? Some people are really, I would say 9 out of 10 people are really awesome about it. Yeah, I appreciate you letting me know that. I was there 3 years ago when a warden was out there, and it was a grandfather and his grandson, and they were out there fishing, and he ticketed that person for being out there. I feel bad about that. That's not what we're trying to do. I don't think those people were aware of that, but that's what happened. So as far as any type of policy items on that, there are clearly signs there, but do people follow signs? I don't know if they really do or not. I want to get into the launch hour situation, and I clearly feel that there is some misinformation that is being given to you about the launch, about the hours that can be. You asked the question before, I don't know your name, but you asked the question about the hours. The hours at the Henske Hillside Lake Access are 6 in the morning until 9 in the evening. I was here when this all was set, and I pushed to have it 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, because we felt 7 o'clock was a fair time in the morning so people could sleep, things like that, our kids and things could sleep. And 9 o'clock was a fair time to have people get off of there. I was there a month later when the board came back to me and said, we're not doing 6, we're not doing 7, we're going to make it 6 because we want to be consistent with Ackermann's growth. And so we want all, because otherwise it's just going to create confusion. You can access Ackermann's at 6, but you can't access Silver Lake Henske at 7. So they said, and I can show you a picture on my phone that I took of the sign where the sign originally was built, and it said 7 to 9, and then they put a sticker over it, and now it says 6 to. So I get that. Okay, and that was the idea. When the launch was built, the intentions were that they would be neighbors, but this was a launch that was put in the middle of a neighborhood. There's people living on both sides, either side, and they were going to be sensitive to that. If you go back, there was a document that was created back at that time, and it's an inch thick. Logan has managed to come up with a couple of paragraphs from that, but he found that document and he saw it, and then we asked him for that document. He said he would supply it, because he has not done that. We were expecting to have a meeting with Logan so we could address these things. That has not happened. We were hoping. So here we are. We're here right now. We don't believe we should be here right now. We believe that the launch hours as set is the right of Washington County. The DNR will only say 2 things about launch hours. One, they say clearly that you have to allow egress from a lake. That makes 100%. If you're going to receive any federal funds. Now remember, when this park was built, close to $1 million were received in state grants, federal grants, etc. It was well vetted at that time. Okay, that this is what it was. These hours were set, and it was well vetted at that time. And now here we are with someone comes up and says, hey, this isn't correct by the DNR. It's not right. It's not correct. You're not correct. You have to allow 24 hours of egress for safety purposes. We absolutely agree with that. Or you don't receive you don't receive state funds from the DNR. We get that. We totally do. None of us are opposed to that. But then they keep stating that the hours should be 6 to 11. Now, again, I want to read something to you here. It's right on the first document here. And it says here that the hours should be 6 to 11. And if you go up above, they keep stating in number 1, it says state code NR 1.91. Okay. You were supplied with that code. Okay, so if you continue on back, here it is. There's the paragraph. Somebody please read at me anywhere in there that says that the hours in there are from 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Show me that. I want to see where that number comes from. 6 to 11. Now, the only thing that you'll see, and believe me, I've done a great deal of research on this. I've got documents that I can show you that clearly show that that's not being followed. Okay, I'll just give you a simple example. Lac La Belle, okay, which is down in Waukesha. I don't know if any of you have been to that lake. Gorgeous lake, beautiful lake. Their launch hours are far more restricted than ours is. Public access, complete public access. And yet they get all the funding and everything. They can operate that way. That's just one example. I can go on and on and on about the hours. Okay. Any of you have ever fished up at Lake Winnebago? Lake Winnebago up there, you can access their launches 24 hours a day. They have no restrictions. Whatever time you want to. Because again, they're large areas. They're not in the middle of residential areas. Nobody's complaining. There's no issues except that way. There is no 6 to 11 o'clock. There's no such thing as that. You can't, all you can find is that in general for state parks, it's 6 to 11 o'clock. But even if you go into the documentation, and I have that for state parks, they clearly have numerous exceptions to that. And they list them, the exceptions that they have. So that's not correct. That is just not correct. What Washington County has the right to do is to set the hours for their park. Now, I want to read something to you that I think should clarify this once and for all. If you go to the actual statement from the DNR, it says, and I read it to you, public boating access shall at a minimum be open during normal operating hours for outdoor public recreational facilities in the vicinity. The vicinity is Henske, Hillside Lake access. That's the vicinity. Ackermann's Grove. That's the vicinity. And so they clearly say that that's where you set your hours. Where you're getting 6 to 11, where that's being stated in here, I have no idea. One of the things I just want to mention at the bottom here, it says course of action. I'm sorry, it's at the bottom of number 1. It says changes to launch hours will result in a loss of funding for resource enhancement services such as invasive species control, fish stocking, and habitat, etc. If any of you read that carefully, that doesn't make any sense. So what they're saying is that if we change our hours, and our hours right now are 6 to 9, then we're going to lose this. So whoever wrote that sentence simply doesn't make any sense. But I think I get what they're saying is that if we don't change our launch hours, we're taking a risk of losing invasive species. And so, for instance, Jim Ketter, that's what he's involved with. Okay. And I'm sure that's part of his interest here. I can clearly show you a document from Lac La Belle with their restrictive hours. And then right after that, I can clearly show you the document where they have applied for all of the DNR's funding, invasive controls. There are a number of things. I've got the documents and received them. Nobody's losing any funding over hours of launch. Washington County, you have a right to set your hours. What you cannot do is stop anyone from coming off that lake. We all get that. We're in agreement on that. So I would like to see this hours change dead. We maintain the hours as we are. We leave as it has been for 18 years. And at Ackermann's Grove, I don't know how long Ackermann's Grove's been along. For all those years, it's been. Any questions? Any questions?
So a couple things I just want to point out. Stu, thank you for your comments. I don't, I have been here for the past, through COVID, through the use of the boat launch expanding. And I have also been behind continuing to push this discussion and actually making improvements to the rules out there, addressing commercial uses, enforcement of parking, simply because this is an issue that we just, for a variety of reasons, we had turnover, we continue to push it off. I also in turn was the individual in the department who pushed to bring this discussion forward today, even knowing that these questions existed and that there was research done and documentation done and that we potentially may need time. The reason I did that is because as we move forward to the PRDs at Ackerman's Grove and Silver Lake, to gather feedback, to have those discussions, which I think is the role of what we should be doing in terms of educating these lakes about rules and policies, and in turn what the county's position is. I did not feel good about that without our elected officials kind of having a heads up on, hey, these are the issues that are being talked about, and here's what our position, on the surface is going into these discussions, right? Because if we sit down with them for this very reason and we say, I'm picking this topic and we come out on, this is how we feel. And you get hammered and then there's all these calls to the county board supervisors and they go, wait, what? And so I don't feel like that's adequate public policy making for those reasons. So I got asked to postpone the item. I said, I'm not postponing this item because I want to have this dialogue, and postponing this item does not advance us in this discussion at all. And we want to get to the parking enforcement improvements and the signage improvements and the patrol outcomes prior to May 1. We say we're going to do it in the off season every year and we never follow through. So I just wanted to get on my soapbox about how I was the individual pushing Logan, pushing Ed to basically say, no, you're talking about this. We are having a discussion with our county committee on this item. The points in having Stu raised are legitimate. He has documentation. At this point, Brad, we want to take a look at that. It was always our intent to kind of go to the PRD next, gather discussions and come back. And I think we should do that. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at the staff level related to this discussion, and are not necessarily asking for you to opine at this point on what you feel the hours should be, because you just don't quite frankly have those that have the information. But if you have some comments as we go into those discussions, I do feel like we should proceed visiting the PRDs and getting that input. You're certainly all welcome to, I don't know if I speak for Jim, but if you're interested in participating or gathering that, otherwise we certainly will go forward with that and report back on kind of how this, and note you're going to have similar issues and also different issues coming up next month about Ackerman's Grove. And so that's part of the reason to have these conversations. We actually thought this was the easier discussion to go first and start the dialogue around boat launches. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at. I don't know if that helps you, but so essentially at this point, we just recommend, if you want to think through or on some of the other items in that memo, if there's any objection to the patrol boat parking at the launch, or, how we're proposing to handle commercial uses, or any of the other stuff you see in that memo, certainly would be looking for that type of input, because those are the positions that we're going to start with when we tackle the PRD in January. So just kind of noted, I'm happy to open it up for discussion, but we will take a look at the launch hours with legal counsel and come back on that topic.
Thank you, Chair. You know me, Miss Ludovic, I always have a opinion. I have no qualms with the commercial piece. We need to protect, the county and liability and all that, and restrict that. I mean, you're living there, as you said, it's a residential community. To expect that, I think that's, other property owners, that's a whole nother story, because you guys are all an association, you're doing it to yourselves, but well, okay, let's put some constraints on there. I think that's fair. As for the hours, I also think that's fair and reasonable to understand what's there. But I also understand county's perspective of having consistency in hours across all the lakes and the launches. but not necessarily opposed to differences there. I mean, they are what they are, and people that use it know, all right, this one I can only get here at 6 and then I'll get there at 7. So I don't really have concerns about that. But the longer hours, I think that's just unreasonable, in my opinion. Going to 11 o'clock for launching, it's, how many people will do that? And guess what? If you don't like that particular lake, you can go to another lake. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, may I weigh in for a moment from legal perspective? Every single thing that Stu said and brought to your attention today, he's correct. These are legitimate points, legitimate arguments, legitimate questions. And as a county, there are certain things we do take our marching orders from the state for, but we've operated that launch for a long time with the understanding that the hours are till 9 o'clock at night. And then, as I understand it, recently, it was brought to the county's attention through some DNR channels that we need to have that boat launch open till 11 o'clock. And I pulled the same codes and I looked at it and I have the same questions and some of the same concerns. And I didn't have much time, just really a few days notice of this brewing. But I would appreciate some time to look into it and try to answer, because everything you asked, it's like you were in my head. I asked the same questions through the office this week. There's that language in NR 1.91, which says that the launch must be open a minimum of normal operating hours for public outdoor recreational facilities in the vicinity. None of that's defined anywhere. What does that exactly mean? It seems odd to me that a county would be robbed of its authority to set hours within its own parks, even a special use park, which is what we call the boat launch. And maybe that is the case, but I would like an opportunity to at least sit down with my team upstairs, to speak with some of my contacts who are versed in this type of research at the DNR and see exactly what the story is before we just rely on an informal opinion from a warden or somebody who said, hey, you guys are incorrect, before we have a knee-jerk reaction. We change hours that alienate the whole neighborhood and maybe aren't necessary. So I would like an opportunity. Maybe you and I can even speak for a minute or two afterwards, because I know I looked into Lac La Belle. I think their hours till 8 o'clock at night or something, if I recall. So there must be more to the story. So I would like an opportunity to look into it. And I'm certainly willing to advise the committee at some point in the days ahead too.
If I could piggyback on that, then that's if you find a definition from area vicinity by the DNR that does say 6 to 11, you're gonna have hundreds of lakes across the state that are non-compliant then. Because I just brought up 3 really quickly. It was easy. I mean, you just Google it. It's in this world of Google, it's so easy. Go to a lake and find a public access and then see what the launch hours are. And they're all over the place as to what they are. But I cannot see where they're coming up with that number 6 to 11. And there's an answer to that. There is. And some warden down in Waukesha County and right at where his office is, just several miles away, is a lake that's not compliant to that. And yet they're receiving funding. So I appreciate that. I just want to see one thing, Jamie, I came to you with the stuff about the, with the noise and the issue with the commercial, and you brought that forward and you've done it, and I appreciate that. I really do. It was a huge problem. If I've come across yours, I think maybe I have that. Maybe I'm not appreciative for things that are being brought up in here. I apologize for that, because that was not my intention. You have some things brought through here. Henske, as all of us can attest, has become a little bit of a hot mess lately. There just aren't things being done down there that aren't being taken care of. And I think part of it is with staffing and people and people getting more work that they have to do and they just don't have time to take care of it. I get that, I do. But Jamie, I truly appreciate what you brought forward, and I hope that that's something that ends up happening. I think it's a very good proposal.
Well,
Thanks.
I appreciate you saying that, and I just want to reiterate for our elected bodies that we knew,
Logan knew that this specific issue on the hours was potentially a bit unresolved, and actually came in 3 days ago and said we should table this entire discussion, of which I said we're not tabling it because we wanted to bring it forward, right? So that was intentional, even though we know we didn't have all the answers, as this is simply a discussion item on the agenda today to help raise awareness for our elected officials going into other discussions we have planned. So I just wanted to reiterate that from if you have questions about this item, feel free to reach out to Ed. He's the guy coordinating ultimately what happens and what the launch is how we're gonna work on making Henske and Ackerman's Grove a little less of a hot mess going forward. So appreciate that.
Our thank you to everyone who's been involved in this discussion. I thank you for having the discussion. Obviously, this is something that's going to come back to this committee and let us know when that time comes and then keep us informed of progress and other changes. So, yes, sir, Mr. Krebs.
Yeah, I got a couple questions or parts to the airplane that we're building here as we're flying it. Jamie, thank you first for bringing it here for the heads up because so we aren't blindsided down the road from residents. I do think it is wise the next step would be start working with the local PRDs to get their input from their perspective on the issues too. Question is all these course of actions or policy issues here, how are they going to be approved and implemented? Are those coming back to this committee for us to actually have as an action item at a future date then?
So some will. The ordinance on parking, which parking was added later and will come up next month with Ackerman's Grove, requires law changes. Some do not. Some are more operational in nature, but because of the high profile of them, we wanted to make everybody aware of them. But at a minimum, what our intent is we have the Ackerman's Grove or Little Cedar Lake PRD in December. The next item on the agenda with Tap Yard is also going there for feedback and discussion about how that gets implemented, as well as I believe that we're lined up to see Silver Lake in January in terms of starting with these recommendations and noted the hours is probably going to be a little bit more of a discussion, but the others yep, we're going to go forward with the patrol boat, et cetera. And then it would be our intent to report back on, what the outcomes in each of these areas are. So if there are others that are making everyone really uncomfortable, I noted on the noise, and that might be one that I'll be curious to hear from the PRD, how noise complaints are actually, how they are handled now, if they're calling our own county staff to do that. I know we don't have any intention at the park staff level of enforcing noise is really what that memo is trying to say. So we can have that conversation. But so essentially, I don't know if that answers your question. At a minimum on some of the items, it'll be a report back. Hey, we told them, yep, we think we can park the patrol boat there. We're doing it. So if specifically that one, if there's any objections to those other ones or discussion, we think they're pretty straightforward. We'd like our approach on the commercial uses. So that's an operational type implementation of our current laws. We're going in with those responses. So that's kind of we're going into these conversations with what's kind of outlined there. And we will go back and do some additional research on the lake hours.
At the end of the day, this committee makes the final decision on these. If there is controversy on these policy decisions, would that be?
It's correct in saying that we have a
this committee /
collaborative
county board?
approach. And I want to make sure that whatever, to the extent that the county executive and the committee and the representatives of these areas and the PRD can work together on an approach that everybody is probably unhappy with, that's
The fair deal.
then we know we have a fair deal. That's my goal, which is why we're in a discussion format. Whether you technically have authority over some of this stuff, I don't know the answer to each of those. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is I'm reading through this and I have my own opinion, which is probably different than other committee members and different than PRD or resident opinions.
Right.
Specifically on the commercial use of the launches and also the hours. But at the same time, I'm not looking for us to have a discussion here until we've heard the other the other opinions of the stakeholders until we're ready, or if we're able to actually vote on it and stuff. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but we got to have some discussion, but I'm not looking to get into the details of what I would normally pick on right away with these.
Right, because we haven't talked about these solutions yet, right?
Yep.
So, noted, at a minimum, we're gonna come back on a discussion, and between now and then, we can have a conversation offline about some of
Sure.
them, and, because some of them are existing laws that we're just looking at
enforcing.
operationally enforcing. So as a county board, or as a board, you technically would have the authority to say, you might have the authority, depending on the law and the governing law under boat launches, to say, we want to make a change in the ordinance to X, right? As a result of these discussions, but the current administration is kind of Y in terms of the laws. So this is a big discussion, and we knew that it was going to be, which is honestly why we've
Launches and lakes.
pushed it off.
Launches and lakes, it's always a big discussion.
Right. I think I said and Jim can note, he's probably got emails from me from 2019 saying we wanted to comprehensively look at and get everybody back on the same page about the rules on the boat launch. So yeah, we knew this was going to be probably multiple meetings, multiple different discussions could occur, on areas maybe where there is. I also don't want the board to make an issue out of a non-issue. There's like one commercial use, there's a handful a year. We have a way of regulating it on a case by case basis. We don't want to create over regulation or burdens on people, that we have to then administer, so there's pros and cons to some of that as it relates to, this is relatively, there's only a couple of issues a year, right? So
It's not a daily occurrence like other lakes, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. Just two quick questions, probably for PRD or whoever could answer it, but could you repeat what the current launch hours are there? And then also, what is the current wake times of the lake?
wake time.
Yeah.
So he asked for the wake times.
The wait times are, I think that's a day. It's kind of a morning. Goes up at night. And then on weekends, there's kind of morning again. The other question was the hours. The hours were originally set by the board as 7 o'clock to 9. Six o'clock to 9 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Do you know, Jamie, do you know, were those hours back in when the boat launch was built, 6 to 9 PM, would that have been the hours of our normal park hours? Because now our code says parks open 6 to 10.
Ed, do you know that?
We can find it. I just didn't know if anybody knew it off the top of their head, because I wonder if that's why it was changed to 6 AM to 9.
Ackerman's is still exactly the same as Henske. And I have a picture of that, of the sign down at the sign.
Be in this room so that you can do a little light reading on what was said at the time. It's not that long ago, and we have extensive documentation.
Okay, I do think it's probably good timing that it's reasonable that this can be solved by next May when the season would start up again. So I think we can hopefully not drop the wall and just finish this conversation.
With all due respect, that's not some of the first project. Use hours.
Sure.
They're different reading. I'm not an ice fisherman. I'm not an ice fisherman. All the guys that are out there,
I think with the conversation starting now, yeah, we'll miss the season of ice fishing, but it will be in effect for next water season and following ice seasons after that. So at least if we're setting, let's set May-ish as our target date to have substantial agreement on stuff.
And with the amendments Ed's working on to the ordinance allowing our new weekend staff patrol to do enforcement, which we need, that's kind of part of this conversation. I do believe for the first time, we might be in a position to actually follow through on what we say, at least with the new administration. Because as he pointed out, none of us were around when this boat launch went in. And so, it goes in, you have the commitment from the people doing what they said they were going to do. Then the whole staff turns over. Nobody remembers, nobody cares the same way that the people who put the launch in do. And so that's why we kept saying we need to get the buy-in again from everybody, but the county mostly, that these are what the rules are going to be. And then this is what our obligation is going to be going forward. Or there's an opportunity here and the launch saw, 100% increase in usage as a result of COVID, which is factual. We have that data. So we know that some of these issues are growing as outdoor recreational opportunities in our county and our population grows. And so this is definitely something that we did not, and I repeat this again, did not expect to solve this today, nor did we expect that we would be in a position to be asking this committee for, tell us what to do. We know you don't live on lakes. We know you haven't talked to your constituents. We know it's more of a lot of people around this issue are very passionate and they will pick up the phone and call the elected officials. And when they do so, it's kind of well, hey, why is he calling me? And we don't want people to overreact when we're currently working on this. So I appreciate that. I appreciate how Stu and his guys have continually worked through staff. It's very much appreciated, and we'll have a lot more dialogue on this as we continue to move forward. So thank you.
Right, just a moment, Jim Ketter from the Silver Lake PRD. I would like you to consider too, as you move through this, how they figure that parking lot, the hours there. You got the boat launch hours, now you got the parking lot hours, and a guy can take his boat out any 24/7. Well, where's he gonna park to get his boat and so on? So that's gotta be addressed. But my main really concern there is the park needs some work from cleanups from the standpoint of dead trees and stuff laying around. But with today's change in people's use of Silver Lake or more lakes, that you can go down to Fleet Farm and buy a kayak, you've got two places in that park to park for kayak parkers or anybody. In other words, if you and I want to meet down there, we can go there and walk around the park, and we've taken up two spots. And somebody with a kayak can't be there. So I really think that needs about six parking places for kayaks or safer kayaks, because like I said, those other two can be taken for just anybody walking their dog. Okay, so just give us some thought to that as you move forward, because, those of us that live on a lake would like to see you take all the motorboats parking out and put kayaks there. Well, then we know that's not going to happen. So let's just, address that and say, look, kayakers should be able, because they've been parking at the restaurant there today, in the yacht club parking lot over there, and nobody's really said anything, but I think it formalized, it needs to be fixed. Thank you.
We do have some space for some expanded parking out there. We just also, that's a hot topic as well. So,
Hi there, I'm Dan. I live on the other side of Stu. And I don't have to say a whole lot because Stu did a fantastic job. But I guess I'll use this platform to speak about the enforcement, because I think no matter what we do, the enforcement is a huge issue. I think, we've been asking Logan and Eric Hyatt before that we wanted to get a meeting with, you'd have to have it with Schulteis, the sheriff, because the deputies, can't make any decisions. But the Washington County Sheriff's Office doesn't really know their involvement in the boat launch over there. They don't really align with the ordinances that we have in place. They don't perceive them in the same way sometimes. So I think it's most important, if we're going to have them involved in this, then we need to have a meeting with them and then get them on the same page. Because right now, if somebody comes, like, it's 9 p.m. at night right now, but there's still people staying there till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And the only enforcement that is there is when Stu and I are disrupted, we have to call the Washington County Sheriff's Office. And I think it was last summer or the summer before, I've got flashlights shining in my house. I have to then come out and then be involved in the circumstance that's going on. And then if anything's gonna move forward, I have to write a report, or Stu has to write a report. If there's a citation written and they want to contest or plead not guilty, then we have to show up in court. I'm not looking for enemies because they know where we live. So it's frustrating. And I think it's probably most important. Whatever we do, we've got to get that figured out. If they're going to be involved, because I know Logan had mentioned that you guys might write the citations, but how is that going to work? Like, are you guys going to sit out there at 9 o'clock at night and then write the tickets, or are Stu and I going to have to call you guys at 10:30 at night, or take pictures of their license plates? I mean, it's silly. So I think it's very important that people understand that the enforcement it's the wild, wild west out there right now. And when I moved in there, I saw all the ordinances, and it was very important to me before I even made an offer on the property that we own, that I thought, wow, they really got this together. They're enforced, they're taking care of this boat launch, but I was sorely mistaken from what I've seen in the last 2.5 years. The other thing is, we're the only 3 here. I don't know, is anybody else on the lake even aware of what's going on?
So no, we made you aware because we know of your interest in it. We do plan to go to the PRD in January. To your point, again, we have not communicated this up our chain of command at all recently to this point. So I don't want to mistake what our intent really was in putting this on an agenda, is that, we can't, in my mind, we're going to send Logan out to these discussions and Ed, to help work on these solutions. And we're working on the enforcement component with the sheriff, and we're doing this stuff. And then we've got a mob on whatever issue it is, and no one's aware. So I'm just pointing that out to you because we did not go through that hassle of, or not hassle, but we did not want, this was not a public hearing. We did not want all of the lake showing up with their opinion at this point. And I'm not saying that to be rude. I'm just.
If we keep moving forward on the path we're on right now, will everyone on the lake eventually be informed of what is happening here? I mean, especially if we were to stay on the path of 11 p.m. at night on the boat launch. I mean, would that be something where all the residents on the lake would be informed of something like that before it was even voted on?
Well, it's our intent to partially achieve some of that dialogue with the PRD in January,
Okay.
which is the best avenue that we have to all of the lake residents.
Okay.
And then, we've always tried, when issues of pertinence come up, to send agendas to make people aware of the discussions, so that they don't blindside people. I think we did do that, and we will continue to do that.
Okay. All right. We will communicate that to the lake. What's that? Yeah.
We got some feedback first, so we get some quick feedback from the people, so we just don't have some random, things at the January meeting. And we really
Right.
didn't have a January meeting planned, but we'll put on the agenda there, so we.
Well, and I'll point this out, because I know the county executive feels this way, and I know we feel this way. And this is for the committee members, is that is part of the input, what you receive from lake residents. But keep in mind, these are the individuals that all live on the lake, right? So there's another group of users of that boat launch that you also represent. So as we have these discussions, and depending what direction they go, enforcement is something that I think everybody can agree on, but depending on the scope and what types of changes are proposed, we may need to go even slower. And unfortunately, that's kind of the public policy process of, with the, in creating overly restrictive rules and regulations that hinder the lake access for other residents of the county. So right now, I think we're in a good position to move forward. I think there are some things in the memo, there's some discussion points that I hope please the PRD. That we're even talking about enforcement and that those are relatively straightforward, and others where I know they may be less happy. And I think that's part of, a good solution usually is not, not everybody's 100% happy with the enforcement strategy because it could be better, or it could be worse, but it is what it is. I've had several conversations with the sheriff. We know that boat launch hours is not a high priority for him or for law enforcement in lake. Usually when the lake is really busy, there are accidents happening or there are other things that call their attention first. So we are going to take that burden on as a parks department and are in a better position to do so now that we potentially have resources we can dedicate to it. So
The sheriff's office, I still think would like to be involved. I mean, even last night when I was walking out to my garage, put some stuff away, he was doing his route through there at 5 p.m. They're still driving through there. But I think everybody just has to be on the same page, and they don't know what we're even thinking at.
right. We've talked about that, about getting on the same page with what the tickets are, what the enforcement is, because they are a part of the solution and they can be.
Yeah.
It's more of the, typically when it's just really busy, that's when it's harder for them because their busy season or their busy days coincide with busy lake days typically.
Well, the only other thing I guess I would mention is no matter what we do, we got to have it. The hours need to be on the website the same as they are on the sign out at the boat launch, because right now, as they've been since 2004, they're 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. But on the website, it says 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So I've got an argument with somebody out there it's already 10:30, but they say, well, it's 10 p.m. on the website. So I guess just that no matter what, that everything is consistent too.
Mhm.
So
I have a copy of the website. Let's see, 10 o'clock. I don't know why you guys have that. It's not what you're saying. Definitely. One thing I'd like to throw out to you, Chief, there are actually two groups. The PRD is one of them that you can contact. But there's another group called the SLPR, which is a group that was specifically created when the launch was going to go in to try to specifically deal with the issue for launch. And so that might be a group that you could get a lot of traction with getting their opinion and getting them out. We've done a lot. I was on that board for 10 years. And so there's a lot of information that they also hopefully get out. The PRD has kind of their role, and that group that I'm telling you about, their role was a big part of this creative. Just so you're aware.
Yeah, thank you. I think, can we go to the concessionaire next? Just because I know Nick is here from Franklin somewhere.
Yeah,
Ed, do you
let's,
see Nick out
let's
there?
now move on to the action items. And this is the resolution authorizing the application of an airport public facilities permit for a concessionaire at Ackermann Grove. Motion by Mr. Gallitz. Is there a second?
I don't know. What are we second?
Well, we need a motion in a second so we can move into discussion. So we need a motion in a second, and then we can go into discussion. All right. Ms. Ludovic, are you
Are
going
you
to
on A
provide?
or B?
Pardon? Mr. Gallitz and Mr. Krebs. You want to explain this,
Sure.
please?
I will. Ed just stepped out to grab Nick, who is with the tap yard, who is the recommendation for, are we on that one? For
Yes.
the concessionaire appointment. So a little background on this. So we did an RFP looking for interested concessionaires in Ackerman's Grove County Park. As part of that process, we called all of the local bars and restaurants within the radius of the park, letting them know that we were entertaining proposals to put a beer garden in this park. We received one proposal, which is what we're recommending to you here today. Timing is important for this because they are looking at making the investment for May. And so they also do not yet have licenses secured from the state Department of Revenue, which requires the authorizing board resolution before those applications can be made. So they still have to go through that process and be approved in terms of holding the appropriate licensure necessary and enter into an agreement with the county, which we are still negotiating. Those details will not be finalized until pending, discussion by this committee. We are visiting the Ackerman's Grove Lake Protection District on December 8th, specifically about this item, and want to make sure that we openly discuss what's happening. Specifically, we feel like if there is going to be noise hours, those types of things, we want to make sure we're providing that opportunity for input from those residents. So, Paul, are they out there?
Yeah.
Does he have Nick? Okay, so that's really kind of the background on this resolution. Again, the policy question here, and I'd like to just note that what your role is really kind of this concept of should you approve a concessionaire in Ackerman's Grove County Park. We're happy if you have any detailed thoughts. We'd always love to hear those. However, we're really not looking for consensus on specifics to his operation. However, he is here out of a courtesy to answer questions and give you background if you'd like it. This would be the place for that conversation if it's going to happen. But again, we competitively evaluated this. So this is really, the question is, do you want to allow the concessionaire in Ackerman's Grove County Park? So I ask you to keep that in mind, but please feel free to, if Nick, since he's here, would you like him to just say a few words about?
Well, just a question, isn't this similar to what we just did a couple months ago for one of the other parks?
Yes, this is similar to what we did for Buildas in Glacier Hills County
That's
Park.
what I thought. All right,
But
so-
it's a little different in terms of what the intent is. Mostly, Nick is looking at a more permanent type of an operation, or it's not permanent, it's temporary, but it's more frequent. So.
Okay, sir, if you would please identify yourself and then tell us all about your operation.
Sure. My name is Nick Marking. I own the Tap Yard Beer Gardens. This is our second year of doing the Tap Yard Beer Gardens. We have an array of beer gardens in Waukesha. We have one in Waukesha, one in Bayshore, one in Milwaukee, and this would be one in Ackerman's Grove. How we set this up is we put a container, retrofitted tractor trailer container bar, and then we tap off of 2 beer caddies for our beer gardens. So we've been doing this a number of years, and we look forward to being a great part of Ackerman's Grove. And it's such a beautiful park and overlooking the lake. We're very excited to be a part of Washington County.
Would this be an operation that would be just on very specific dates and times, or on a continual basis, day in,
Yes,
day
we're
out?
gonna operate from May 1 to November 1, Wednesday through Sunday, with hours every day during Wednesday through Sunday.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Krebs?
Has there been discussion with staff as far as the location within the park that this is going to be set up?
Sure. You did the walkthrough. Do
Yep,
you
we
want
did
to,
the
I'm happy to
walkthrough,
otherwise.
With the staff, where everything would be placed on the park. I know there are those very specifics there to, with the drainage areas and things like that, where we need to put everything. So we did discuss that with everyone there at the park district.
Okay. and
It's
that's-
the middle, overlooking the lake though. If you've been out there to any of the 1840 beer gardens that were out there, kind of that you sit up there, those the
so
tables,
they're
the idea would be that
similar
you're,
location to that.
yeah, you're
Okay.
up there overlooking the lake.
No, that's all. Only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Since we were talking about hours of operation, previous discussion, you talked about the dates. Do the hours of operation align also with park constraints and?
Yes, they will. Yep. And we obviously, number one, we want to be a good neighbor and add a benefit to the Parks Department, but we certainly will be abide by any of the rules, hours set forth.
Key, you bring it in and you take it out with you?
Very
Any
much so, very
trash and
turnkey.
debris and that sort of thing?
Yep, very turnkey. So we've been doing this for a number of years. So we're a very, very sleek operation that that have been doing great beer gardens across southeastern Wisconsin here. So
Okay, very good. Any other questions? At this point in time, we have a motion and a second to approve to appoint Tap Yard as concessionaire at Ackerman's Grove Shelter Area Number 1 and forward this to the County Board of Supervisors for their consideration. In favor, say aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you
It's
very much.
approved. Next item on the agenda would be the Objecting Authority Village of Richfield preliminary plat for Monches Highlands. You need a motion and a second for discussion purposes. Motion, please. Mr. Krebs, Mr. Gallatz. Phil, or Paul, I'm sorry, Paul, you're up again.
Yeah, I really don't have anything more to add than what's in the staff report for Monches Highlands. It's in the village of Richfield. They manage all their own erosion control. It will have septic systems. Soil tests have been provided to us and approved. Most of them are conventional systems with a few at grade, and I think maybe 1 or 2 pound for the lots that are being proposed.
Any questions or comments, discussion points? All right, we're going to vote for no objection to the preliminary plat for Monches Highland subdivision. In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, approved. All right. At that point in time now, Mr. Eberly, or is it you? I think that you got a tag team going here. Review chapter 575 of shoreline wetlands and floodplain zoning ordinance change. And please do not review all the changes that are proposed. Well, you got about 50 pages of strikeouts, I believe. So
So in that case, I'll let Paul Steve walk you through it, Mr.
Oh.
Chairman, but just kind of set this up. We were contacted by the DNR, working with them, very good partnership and Paul's expertise in updating the code. And so essentially there's 3 major areas focused in on, and I'm just gonna have Paul kind of walk through what those are. Let's go ahead.
thank you, Paul.
Yeah, no problem. So this has probably been in the works for at least 6 years, I'm guessing. The update to the Cedar Creek floodplain. It starts out with surveyors going out there and doing cross sections and doing a whole hydraulic analysis. I was hoping that this was probably going to be here about a year ago. And I know a lot of the landowners around Big Cedar Lake and Silver Lake that are going to be impacted by this new flood study once it gets adopted. The flood elevation are basically going down for the most part throughout the entire Cedar Creek area. But COVID ended up putting a stall in this for probably about a year, 6 to 8 months, through FEMA trying to get their final approval. But back in August, September, I had a committee report that said the county's been notified that the new floodplain study is done. And it basically starts the clock for the county to give us 6 months to adopt the new maps, basically the new firm maps within our floodplain zoning ordinance. At the same time, some staff level at the DNR sent, and this goes to not only Washington County, but all the municipalities, being the village of Jackson and part of West Bend, that are also impacted by this flood study, that all of us have to update our codes, recognize the new firm maps that are being adopted by FEMA. But also the DNR really strongly encouraged us to look at our ordinance to make sure our ordinance met the minimum standards needed for FEMA, for the floodplain or the flood insurance program. And also the DNR's regulations and requirements for floodways and floodwaters and flood zones. So we looked at, and the DNR did provide a model ordinance to us, and we looked at our code, and it was all the kind of same there, but it was jumbled up. And some additional language was needed to be added to make our code consistent with the DNR's model. And so we met at a staff level and said, well, really the best is probably try to make our code match the DNR's model as much as possible. I mentioned in a closed session, and about 2 years from now, we're going to have the Milwaukee and the Rock River come to the county for new maps and new flood studies. So this will hopefully just make that code change at that time easier, because we're aligning our code closer to what the DNR's model is. And again, this is to meet the minimum requirements. So this is not an overextension of codes and ordinances, and really requires more work. It's a lot of just kind of restructuring within the zoning section of the shoreline wetland floodplain code. A lot of other counties, the codes are separate. You have shoreline and wetland zoning, and then they have a floodplain zoning separate. There were 2 different codes. Washington County, many years ago, we merged it into one.
So it's the shoreline wetland floodplain section, but 99.9% of the changes that are in here are strictly a part of the floodplain. Last year, we had the shoreline ordinance come through basically this same time, for requirements that the DNR was requiring us on the shoreline part of things. But now this is just focusing on the floodplain. So, yeah, I don't plan on going through page by page, line item by line item of all the changes. Hopefully you had a chance to look at that. The reason this is on this month's as kind of just a report only is because there is substantial changes in the code, a lot of strikeouts. But again, it's kind of a lot of that restructuring and adding language from the DNR's model into ours. But talking with legal counsel, they said, boy, it'd be nice to get this to the committee. They can look at all the line item changes, and kind of next month you would just see the final draft without all the line items. And then the mapping will also come along with next month's meeting. That's going to be adopted through a public hearing, or actually there's a public hearing component part of that requirement. So there'd be the code changes and also the maps that go along with the flood area. So this is more just the code language that's in there. Like I said, there's 99.9% of this code change is all floodplain related, but when you give a code to the DNR, they're like, well, because you have a combined code, let's also send it over to the shoreline staff to make sure they look at it. They looked at it a year ago and they said our code was fine, and all of a sudden they come back and said, there's one little area, and that's actually on page 27 and 28. And I even pointed it out in the staff report that deals with lateral expansion. We had lateral and vertical expansion was kind of limited. But they pointed out that's not the case. You can vertically expand, and this is for structures that are within 35 feet of the water. If it's an existing structure that's there, you can vertically expand them. And we kind of said it wasn't. So it's a matter of crossing out that reference dealing with vertical expansion, which is in another section of the code. So if there's any specific language, like I said, wasn't really planning to go through everything in detail, more or less just to talk about any major things. If you had a chance to hopefully look at it and read through, questions, comments, concerns, I'll take them.
Questions or discussion point, Mr. Krebs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You pointed out on page 74, section 13, that was kind of a staff decision to kind of ease up the regulatory burden on the non-conforming structures, which I'm happy with. So thank you for that.
Yep.
But I'm trying to figure out if it's conflicting on page 72, section C, or nope, it's page 72, middle of page, paragraph or section 8, that section there that's blue. It talks about limiting to not to exceed the 50% of the equalized value of a structure. Are these talking about different situations or structures, or which, to me, they kind of are the same issue, but different things or different directives?
Just reading the section myself. So what, I guess maybe I'll try to explain a little bit more of what Act 175 did by that section 13. So if you have a structure that's in the floodplain and you want to do maintenance, additions, anything else, they look at the equalized assessed value. And if you go anything over that 50% of that value, you have to bring that structure to be a conforming structure. And what 175 does is it allows the non-conformance of the structure to stay in place to exceed that 50% of the value. But you also have to meet almost all the rules and regulations as part of being a conforming structure, but without actually changing that terminology from a conforming structure, from a non-conforming structure to a conforming structure, if that kind of makes sense. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it officially. But that's what has been explained to me, and how this it's not a 50% present per event basis does not count against the cumulative. So again, this is taken all out of the DNR's model exactly the way they had it.
Because I just glanced at them both too, and they're both talking about non-conforming. One says non-conforming structure, one says a non-conforming building. But other than that, they're both non-conforming. But one prohibits based off the value and one says that shall not be prohibited based off of the cost. I just want to make sure we understand what we're approving are clear, so our constituents know what they can improve or not improve. I don't know what this would all apply to. My brain goes straight to the boathouse issues. I don't know if, I'm sure there's a limited of primary structures that this might affect too, but typically this would be a boathouse or accessory structure that I'm thinking of.
So boathouses, not so much. These are existing houses that are in the floodplain. Because a lot of times boathouses are actually in the floodplain and they're allowed by different kind of provisions in the code.
Okay,
So this is
not boathouse issues here.
this is not a boathouse issue. This is like a regular home kind of issue. And we have a lot of them like in and around Druid Lake. Druid Lake is a much lower lake and it has higher flood elevations. And in 2008, they had a number of houses that did get inundated by flood. So some of the houses, when they go to remodel, revamp, they're actually tearing down the original ones and lifting them all up. And even some additions. So bigger one is we just had one apply on Druid Lake that they wanted to do a garage addition with a living space above the garage. So in that case, that addition and living space above exceeded the 50% equalized assessed value. So they would have had to basically say, okay, we have to raise the entire main floor of the house up, have the basement that's non-usable, to create it as a conforming structure. Well, that 50% value is kind of gone. They still have to follow all the same kind of rules and regulations to raise the floor. But that house can still kind of stay in that site conditions and still being the floodplain without having to truly being, termed and determined to be a conforming structure in the floodplain. So with this, I mean, what 8 does is kind of states that it's a kind of the cumulative effect calculations over the life of the structure. Not a 60%.
And
Does
but
not count against the cumulative.
so it says
calculation.
so it says maintenance. So is 8 referring to maintenance type issues, which I'm assuming we're not tracking anyways? But it's still it's kind of inciting to me that somehow someone is tracking non-maintenance issues and taking a lifetime total addition of what's been done to the property. But then jumping back to 13, it says you can do modifications, additions, and repairs, maintenance repairs, and it's not prohibited based off of cost. I'm still, they're still conflicting to me. I'm just not really understanding that. I would prefer 13 over 8. And it's probably a separate question, not a question, but I'll issue the statement that hypothetical question I always ask is what happens if we don't approve the DNR's suggestions to our code? Because the DNR has a big wish list often, and I just want to know what happens when we don't abide by some or all of them.
So then especially in this case, the county and its residents would not be eligible for the flood insurance program. So I'm not sure
Okay.
what that does beyond, necessarily beyond that, but this is kind of more critical than a lot of the shoreline zoning, additional, overreaching, kind of overregulating kind of codes. This is just meeting up to that minimum FEMA requirement to get there.
It seems like, we're updating our maps, but then all of a sudden with that, we're going through and changing all the language, and not all the language, but we're
Right.
forced to look at all the other language too, which
Mhm.
seems separate but it's the same, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, we could have, because the DNR did actually give us the model, and then we had to actually give a checklist to say, okay, where in the DNR's model does our county code match? And it's so we can cross-reference that. And then when I was looking at the code and doing all the cross-references, I'm like, okay, we'll just do the minimum amount. There was sections of our code, and it was just kind of because of the order where our code originally had the flood fringe, the floodway, and then the floodplain discussion. Now the new process, and that's why there's a lot of changes in here. It's floodway, flood fringe, and then floodplain kind of discussion. And it's like more restrictive to less restriction. Our original code was the opposite. So as you say, you can only do certain things in the floodway, but in the floodplain, you can do everything, you know, you're restricted to things which you can do in the floodway, but also these additional other things that is more loose. We had a lot of repetition of language, that it just made more sense to just say, well, let's flip those 3 sections around because you're more restrictive to least restrictive rather than the other way, because you can't reference things in a code further back in the code. You know, it's not a good process to follow.
Sure.
It would also seem to me that if section 8, 7, 9 would be your general rule, 13 would probably be read to be the exception to those rules, how you get around that, or when those sections wouldn't apply. Again, we're dealing with a lot of boilerplate language here that they send down to us that we don't have a lot of discretion with. But as I sit here and kind of study that, it almost looks like 13 would create the exceptions to section 8, 7, 9, where they're talking about when you can and can't do something based on costs and so on. So
I guess I'm trying to put myself in the real world of how this would actually affect me if I owned a house, non-conforming structure on Druid Lake in the floodplain. The 8 says I'm limited to the improvements I can make on it for its lifetime. I'm trying to figure out how do I then, what makes me eligible for the protections of 13, where I can continue my structure in perpetuity. I have a lot of money.
yeah, and as I look at 13, where I would say maybe that's the case, and again, I'm not defending it necessarily, I'm just kind of talking it through with you, is, you got A, B, C, D, E. It says, notwithstanding anything in this chapter to the contrary, modifications shall not be prohibited based on cost, and the building's non-conforming use shall be permitted to continue if, so here's your A through E sort of say, well, don't pay attention to any of the other stuff if you fall under this section.
So I can go above 50% as long as I can. Does it qualify for all of A through G, or A through, G or H? Wait, I gotta keep scrolling. A through whatever, or is it if I can meet one of those thresholds, then I'm okay? Because I'm trying to figure out, is it just elevating above the flood protection elevation good enough, or then do we also have to then go to B and keep, where does the list end? The burden end for the homeowner to qualify for exceeding the 50% rule.
I would say it's all of them going down, but once you actually get into the at least the I, now you're talking about manufactured homes and then recreational vehicles, so it goes to a different type of structure, a different type of use, in the floodplain. So definitely, yeah, if you have a home in the floodplain, it's all the way through, basically through H, that you would have to meet all of them.
Okay.
Well, you have, for example, under A, you go A, B, and then C gives you then an and then you look at D, but then D gives you an or E. So you almost have to study it through, and some of it looks like it does flow together where it has to be certain ones lumped together and then other places maybe not. So
Sure. I just have concern. I understand the purpose of it from the DNR, but at some point you're forcing people to eliminate their, in this case, our hypothetical situation of primary structure, and you're just not allowed to maintain it anymore, unless you are wealthy enough, to make the grand improvements versus the maybe the lesser improvements, which might be acceptable to the property owner themselves. I'm wondering, do we have to leave section 8 in the proposed change, or is that gonna be something where the DNR takes offense to that? Because without section 8, then do we even need section 13? Because section 13 is kind of the criteria to work around section 8, if I'm understanding it in layman's terms. And we can, we can give it thought, and, you know, I know that we're going to discuss this as an action item at a future date too. So I'm just making sure that we're not going to be handcuffing it
And now's the time to raise those.
or a large cross section of flood.
Right.
Now's the time to ask that Supervisor Krebs, so we certainly can, you know,
Yeah.
voice those concerns and see what response we get and report back.
Yeah, and I don't even, like I said, I was thinking more boathouses leading into this to start with, but you know, now that it's a prime, if this is more possibly a primary structure or a different structure, that's a substantial, could be a substantial structure that we're taking away property rights to, in effect, or how I view it. So.
Do you have a question? Yeah. Supervisor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe to Supervisor Krebs' questioning, just verifying the ordinances based upon conforming or non-conforming, right? And, you know, understandably, if a house is flooded and they need to repair and it costs more than 50%, it seems reasonable that they should be able to live in it and repair it, even if it's more than 50% of its value. But tearing down and rebuilding, that's a different story, right? So that's easy for me to make that distinction. If you're going to do that latter, well, then you need to be conforming. But so anyways, just verifying that the language is appropriate, I guess. And then one question I had, and my apologies, I forgot to mark where it was in the 94 pages, but there was a reduction in a penalty from 200 to 50.
Again, that is a federal requirement of FEMA that any fine or violation given is a maximum of $50. So we specifically called out that it's like, okay, in our shoreline zone, we said our penalty can be up to $500, but in the floodplain, it's maximum of 50. But we could also say, well, there could be violations of shoreline zoning laws as well as the floodplain laws. But it was definitely specific, and I tried to bypass that one, and DNR brought it back and said, no, you need to have that 50% maximum penalty when you're dealing with floodplain violations.
Again, to Supervisor Krebs' point, if by not changing that reduces ability to actually make a claim against FEMA, well, then we have to have it, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
One question, Paul. We're going to have a public hearing on this at a December meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the plan, provided we can get all the other pieces ready for the December meeting in the next couple of weeks. Yep.
Do you anticipate much public input at that public hearing?
No, we don't. So it was about 2 years ago, we had a big public informational meeting about the new floodplain study for Cedar Creek. And we worked with GIS and we had GIS do a map and we sent everybody a postcard that was impacted by this floodplain study. And they either got 3 different postcards, a green one that says the flood elevation went down in your property, a yellow one, which postcard kind of meant that, hey, you had minimal impact. You know, there was a little bit minor changes on your property in the floodplain, and then some red ones that said, hey, you had major impact. And most of the red ones were wetlands already. So there were other regulations and things that didn't impact it. So that informational meeting, we had great response. A lot of people there. A lot of people are happy that we brought that to them at that stage. And again, this is 2 years ago. So COVID kind of put a delay in the adoption of this. So by and large, and I mentioned it before, that the floodplain for Cedar Creek and even on the lakes all went down and is going down based on this new flood study. So a lot of people are waiting, and we get calls almost on a regular basis, monthly, that hey, when is that code gonna be adopted? When is that code gonna be adopted? When is the study gonna be adopted? So yeah, we have people waiting for this. So I don't anticipate really any public comment coming here for the meeting because we did that outreach. I think, Brian, were you at that meeting? This was at the Fair Park? It was okay. All right. Yeah, both Brian's. Right, yep.
Thank you, Paul.
And we'll find out more answers and get more answers on that 8 versus 13 kind of.
Our next meeting will be at 7:30 a.m. on Thursday, December 16th. Note the change in that date for this. We moved it up a week because a week later would be immediately preceding the Christmas break. With that, we are adjourned. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.